What we begin to notice at this point is that the power was never hidden in the words themselves, but in the state of consciousness from which those words are spoken. I've seen this misunderstood again and again, especially in modern interpretations of ancient prayer, where people repeat phrases mechanically and then wonder why nothing changes. The ancients were not asking for reality to shift someday. They were entering the feeling of a reality that already existed, and from that place, the world responded. When I study the oldest surviving prayer fragments, something remarkable stands out. They are not written as requests. They are written as declarations, not demands, not affirmations in the modern sense, but quiet acknowledgments of a truth already fulfilled. This subtle distinction changes everything. The body responds differently when we beg than when we remember. Biology listens to certainty far more clearly than it listens to hope. Here is where belief moves beyond philosophy and becomes biology. Every belief we hold creates a chemical signature in the body. When belief is paired with emotion, that signature becomes amplified, measurable, and instructive to our cells. This is not metaphor, this is physiology. The heart sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. And the quality of that signal is shaped by what we feel is true. Prayer, in its original form, was a technology for generating coherence between heart, brain, and breath. The lost prayer I'm speaking of was never lost to time. It was lost to translation. As languages evolved, the emotional precision of the original meanings faded. Words that once described internal states were reduced to external actions. Instead of "I am grateful," the deeper meaning was "gratitude is my present state." That shift from action to identity is where reality begins to reorganize itself. Modern science is now catching up to what mystics intuited thousands of years ago. When the nervous system enters a coherent state, immune function improves, inflammation decreases, and gene expression changes. We are not victims of our DNA, we are participants in its expression. And the switch that activates that participation is feeling, not thought alone. This is why repetition without emotion fails. The body does not respond to language, it responds to meaning. Two people can say the same words, and only one experiences transformation. The difference is not luck, it is internal alignment. When thought, emotion, and belief collapse into a single signal, the body accepts it as instruction rather than suggestion. I often invite people to stop asking what they want and start asking who they are being while they ask, are they anchored in fear, subtly reinforcing the very condition they want to escape? Or are they embodying the relief, the gratitude, the peace that would naturally arise if the situation were already resolved? The lost prayer operates entirely from the second state. Ancient cultures understood that time does not function the way we perceive it. From the perspective of consciousness, outcomes exist as potentials, and emotion is the key that selects which potential becomes experience. This is why the prayer feels instantaneous when practiced correctly. It is not changing the future. It is aligning with a version of reality that already exists. The body must be convinced first. When the body believes, the mind follows. This reverses everything we are taught. We are told to think positively until we feel better. The ancients felt first, and the thoughts reorganized naturally. This is not denial of hardship. It is a deliberate choice of internal state regardless of external conditions. I've seen people experience profound shifts when they stop trying to fix themselves and instead remember themselves. Healing, clarity, and even unexpected opportunities often emerge without force. This is not because the universe is rewarding them. It is because their biology is no longer broadcasting stress and separation. There is a reason. Breath was always included in sacred practices. Breath is the bridge between the voluntary and involuntary nervous systems. When we slow and deepen the breath while cultivating a coherent emotional state, we send a signal of safety to every cell. Safety is the prerequisite for change. A body in survival cannot create. A body in coherence can reorganize rapidly. This is where the lost prayer becomes practical. It is not something you do once a day. It is a way of entering moments. Before a conversation, before sleep, before making a decision, you briefly inhabit the emotional signature of the outcome you choose. Not with force, not with urgency, but with calm certainty. Over time, this rewires perception. You begin to notice opportunities that were always present but previously invisible. Your reactions soften. Your resilience increases. This is not because the world has become kinder. It is because your nervous system is no longer interpreting neutrality as threat. What fascinates me most is that none of this requires belief in any specific tradition. The mechanism works regardless of culture, language, or philosophy. It works because it is rooted in how humans are designed. Consciousness speaks the language of feeling, and reality listens with precision. When people say this prayer changes reality instantly, they often misunderstand the word instantly. It does not mean fireworks or dramatic events every time. It means the internal shift happens immediately. And from that moment forward, the trajectory is altered. Sometimes the evidence appears quickly. Sometimes it unfolds quietly, rearranging circumstances in ways you only recognize later. The more consistently this state is practiced, the less effort it requires. Eventually it becomes familiar, like returning home after a long journey. And once that familiarity is established, even brief moments of coherence can influence outcomes that once felt outside your control. At this stage, a deeper question naturally arises. If emotion is the language and belief is the structure, then what determines which emotions we can access in the first place, and how early experiences, collective conditioning, and inherited patterns shape the limits of what we believe is possible for us to feel is real in our bodies? This is where the conversation moves from technique into awareness, because many people try to practice this lost prayer and find themselves blocked, not by lack of discipline, but by unconscious emotional habits formed long before they ever chose them. From early childhood, the nervous system learns what feels safe, familiar, and predictable. If stress, conflict, or scarcity were present, the body may have adapted by staying alert, guarded, or tense. Over time, those states feel normal. Even when a person intellectually believes in peace or abundance, their biology may quietly reject those emotions as unfamiliar or unsafe. The body is not resisting change out of malice. It is protecting what it knows. This is why ancient practices emphasized preparation before prayer. Silence, breath, posture, and rhythm were not spiritual decorations. They were tools to gently guide the body into a receptive state. Before the declaration could be felt as true, the nervous system had to be soothed enough to listen. Without that step, words bounce off layers of stored survival memory. Modern neuroscience now confirms that the body stores emotional memory independently of conscious thoughts. Trauma, even subtle forms, can lock certain emotional ranges behind protective walls. Asking someone to feel gratitude or peace without addressing this is like asking a clenched fist to open by force. The more you demand, the tighter it becomes. The lost prayer was never forced. It was allowed. It emerged naturally once coherence was established. This is why patience is not optional in this work. Rushing only reinforces the belief that something is missing. Slowing down sends the opposite signal. It tells the body there is no emergency, no chase, no lack. As coherence deepens, something interesting happens. Emotional states that once felt inaccessible begin to surface on their own. A quiet warmth in the chest, a sense of ease without reason, a subtle trust that does not need explanation. These are not imagined. They are physiological shifts measurable in heart rhythms and neural synchronization. This is also where many people make a critical mistake. They try to hold on to these states, fearing their disappearance. But attachment introduces tension, and tension breaks coherence. The practice is not about holding a feeling. It is about returning to it gently again and again without judgment. Ancient wisdom often described this as remembering rather than creating. You are not manufacturing peace. You are removing what obscures it. The prayer works not because it adds something new, but because it clears interference. When interference drops, the natural order asserts itself. This perspective changes how we approach challenges. Instead of asking how to fix a problem, we ask what internal state would naturally resolve it. Instead of fighting symptoms, we address the signal beneath them. This is not bypassing reality, it is engaging it at its source. I've noticed that when people truly grasp this, their relationship with effort transforms. Action still happens, but it is no longer fueled by urgency. Decisions become cleaner, boundaries clearer, energy conserved. The body is no longer leaking resources through constant stress responses. There is also a collective dimension to this prayer that is often overlooked. Humans are not isolated systems. We are fields within fields. Emotional coherence is contagious. When one nervous system stabilizes, it subtly influences others nearby. This is why ancient communities practiced together, not for belief reinforcement, but for field amplification. Modern experiments show that groups entering coherent states simultaneously can influence outcomes beyond individual bodies. Crime rates shift. Social tension eases. Even environmental variables show measurable change. These findings are controversial, but they are consistent with a universe that responds to coherence at scale. This brings responsibility into the conversation. If our internal states influence more than just our personal experience, then emotional self-regulation becomes an ethical act. Calm is no longer passive. It is participatory. The lost prayer, practiced sincerely, becomes a contribution, not just a request. Still, none of this negates grief, anger, or pain. Those emotions have intelligence. They signal boundaries crossed, values violated, losses needing acknowledgement. The work is not to suppress them, but to process them fully so they do not calcify into identity. Unfelt emotion becomes stored tension. Felt emotion completes its cycle and releases. This is why the prayer was never meant to bypass humanity. It was meant to deepen it, to feel fully, then choose consciously, to honor the body's signals without being ruled by them, to stand in truth without collapsing into reaction. As this practice matures, the distinction between prayer and daily life dissolves. Walking becomes rhythmic. Listening becomes deeper. Even ordinary moments carry a quiet reverence. Not because they are special, but because presence has returned. People often ask how long it takes for reality to respond. The more precise question is how long it takes for the signal to stabilize. Reality mirrors consistency. A scattered signal produces scattered results. A coherent signal, held gently over time, reorganizes patterns that once seemed fixed. There are moments when doubt arises. This is natural. Doubt is not failure. It is a signal to return to the body, to breath, to sensation. Thought alone cannot resolve doubt, only experience can. Each small shift builds trust, not as belief, but as familiarity. The lost prayer does not promise control over life. It offers relationship with it, a dialogue rather than a demand. When practiced with humility, it reveals that many struggles were not battles to win, but misunderstandings to dissolve. And yet, as profound as this understanding is, it points toward an even deeper layer. If coherence is the key, and emotion is the language, then the most influential factor may not be what we feel in rare moments of practice, but the baseline emotional climate we return to unconsciously throughout the day, which raises the question of how identity itself is shaped by repeated states and whether changing reality ultimately requires redefining who we believe ourselves to be at the deepest level before thought, before story, before memory begins to speak again, inside the body as a felt sense of self. Because identity is not just an idea we carry in the mind. It is a pattern of neurological firing, hormonal balance, muscular tension, and emotional expectation that repeats so often it becomes familiar. And familiarity, more than truth, is what the nervous system trusts. Most people try to change their lives without ever questioning the emotional baseline they return to when no one is watching. That baseline quietly dictates choices, reactions, and interpretations of events. If the baseline is urgency, even abundance feels fragile. If the baseline is unworthiness, even success feels temporary. The lost prayer cannot override this baseline. It must gently transform it. This is where repetition takes on a different meaning. Not repetition of words, but repetition of state. Each time we return to coherence, even briefly, we introduce a new reference point. The body begins to learn that safety, gratitude, or peace are not rare experiences, but viable defaults. Over time, the nervous system recalibrates what feels normal. This recalibration is subtle. It does not announce itself. One day you realize you paused before reacting. Another day you notice your breath deepen without effort. These are signs of identity shifting at the biological level. The prayer is no longer something you enter. It is something you recognize. Ancient teachings often spoke of the inner posture. This was not symbolic. It referred to the felt alignment of the spine, breath, and heart. When these are aligned, emotion stabilizes naturally. Modern posture science confirms that body alignment directly affects mood, confidence, and stress chemistry. The body is not expressing the mind. The mind is responding to the body. This insight removes blame from the process. If someone struggles to feel coherent, it is not a moral failure. It is often a physiological one. Years of stored tension, shallow breathing, and emotional suppression take time to unwind. Compassion accelerates this unwinding far more effectively than discipline. One of the most powerful aspects of the lost prayer is its neutrality. It does not require optimism. It does not deny difficulty. It simply establishes a state of internal truth that is independent of circumstance. From that state, action becomes clearer, not easier, but cleaner. Clean action has no internal resistance. Even difficult decisions feel settled when they arise from coherence. The body recognizes alignment instantly. There is less second guessing, less mental noise. This is often mistaken for intuition, but it is actually congruence between systems. I've observed that when people reach this stage, their language changes spontaneously. They speak slower. They choose words more precisely. Silence becomes comfortable. This is not performance, it is regulation. The nervous system no longer needs to fill space to protect itself. There is also a letting go that happens here. Not resignation, but release. The need to control outcomes softens. Paradoxically, results often improve. This is because control is usually driven by fear, and fear fragments the signal. Coherence invites participation rather than force. This brings us back to why the prayer feels instantaneous. The moment coherence is established, suffering decreases. Even if circumstances remain unchanged, the internal experience shifts immediately. This alone is transformative. External change becomes secondary, not because it doesn't matter, but because it no longer defines identity. From this perspective, healing is not fixing what is broken. It is restoring communication between parts that stopped listening to each other. Mind, body, and emotion were never meant to operate in isolation. The lost prayer reunites them. There is a profound humility embedded in this work. You realize how much effort was spent resisting sensations rather than understanding them. How often the body tried to guide you, only to be overridden by habit. Listening becomes an act of courage. As this listening deepens, something unexpected emerges. Choice. Not reactive choice, but spacious choice. The pause between stimulus and response widens. In that pause, new possibilities appear. This is where reality begins to feel less fixed and more responsive. Ancient cultures symbolize this as walking between worlds. Modern language might call it operating from the observer state, but labels matter less than experience. What matters is the felt sense of being grounded yet flexible, present yet expansive. This is also where the practice becomes deeply personal. No two nervous systems unwind the same way. No single rhythm works for everyone. The lost prayer adapts to the individual because it is based on internal feedback, not external rules. People often ask if they are doing it right. The most reliable indicator is not sensation, but integration. Are you more patient with yourself? Are reactions less extreme? Do moments of calm arise spontaneously? These are signs of alignment taking root. It's important to understand that setbacks do not erase progress. Stressful events can temporarily activate old patterns. This does not mean coherence was lost. It means the system is still learning. Returning without judgment is part of the work. Over time, even stress is experienced differently. It becomes information rather than threat. The body recovers faster. Emotional waves move through instead of stagnating. This resilience is one of the most tangible outcomes of the practice. At this stage, the lost prayer is no longer something separate from daily living. It is woven into how you wake up, how you listen, how you rest. Life itself becomes the practice. And when that happens, a deeper realization begins to surface quietly, almost imperceptibly, that what you once called prayer was never a request directed outward at all, but a method of remembering an internal relationship that existed before conditioning, before language, and before the sense of separation ever formed. Inviting an even more fundamental question about whether changing reality is actually about changing events, or about changing the point from which reality is perceived as it continues to unfold. From which perception itself arises. Because perception is not passive observation, it is active interpretation shaped by memory, emotion, and expectation. When that point shifts, the same world appears different, not because it changed, but because the filter through which it is experienced has softened. This is where the lost prayer reveals its most subtle function. It is not a tool for manipulating outcomes, but a practice for relocating awareness from contraction to coherence. From that location, life feels less like something happening to you and more like moving with you. I want to be clear here, because this is often misunderstood. This work does not eliminate challenge. It changes how challenge is metabolized. Instead of accumulating as tension, it moves through as information. The body processes it, learns from it, and releases it. This alone frees enormous creative energy. When perception shifts, patterns that once felt personal begin to look procedural. You see how certain emotional reactions were never about the present moment, but about stored interpretations from the past? Seeing this breaks identification. You are no longer the reaction, you are the one noticing it. Ancient wisdom framed this as stepping out of the story. Modern neuroscience calls it metacognition. Different languages, same experience. The prayer supports this shift by stabilizing the nervous system enough to allow observation without collapse. As observation strengthens, choice expands. Not the dramatic kind of choice that demands willpower, but the quiet kind that arises naturally when options become visible. You don't force yourself to respond differently. You simply notice another response available. This is one of the reasons the practice feels gentle when done correctly. There is no internal battle. Resistance softens because it no longer feels necessary. The body senses safety, and safety unlocks adaptability. Another layer begins to emerge here, one that ancient cultures held with great respect. When perception stabilizes in coherence, intention becomes clearer. Not intention as desire, but intention as direction. You feel where energy wants to move. You cooperate rather than push. This cooperation changes timing. Things unfold with less friction. Meetings happen at the right moment. Information arrives when needed. This is often dismissed as coincidence, but from the perspective of systems, it is synchronization. A regulated system synchronizes more easily with other systems. The lost prayer enhances this regulation. By repeatedly returning to a coherent state, you entrain the body to rhythm rather than reactivity. Rhythm is predictable, reactivity is chaotic, reality responds more smoothly to rhythm. I've noticed that when people reach this stage, they become less concerned with convincing others. There is no need to argue experience. It speaks quietly through behavior. Presence becomes the message. This is important because the work can easily be misunderstood as escapism. It is the opposite. It demands deeper engagement. You feel more, not less, but you are no longer overwhelmed by feeling because it is integrated rather than suppressed. Integration is the key word here. When emotion, thought, and sensation align, there is less fragmentation. Fragmentation is exhausting. Integration restores energy. From this integrated state, even rest becomes more effective. Sleep deepens, recovery accelerates. The body trusts that it does not need to remain vigilant. This trust is earned, not forced. Over time, this trust extends outward. Relationships shift. You listen more fully. You react less defensively. Boundaries become clearer without aggression. Others may respond differently, not because you changed them, but because your signal changed. This highlights an often overlooked aspect of reality change. We do not influence the world directly. We influence our participation in it. The world responds to that participation. Ancient texts often describe this as alignment with a greater order. Modern language might call it coherence with natural systems. Either way, the experience is the same. Life feels less adversarial. The lost prayer does not promise certainty. It offers steadiness in uncertainty. This is far more valuable. Certainty collapses when conditions change. Steadiness adapts. As steadiness grows, fear loses its grip. Not because it disappears, but because it is no longer in charge. Fear becomes one signal among many, not the dominant voice. This is where many people notice a shift in values. What once seemed urgent loses importance. What once seemed secondary gains meaning. This is not detachment, it is clarity. Clarity simplifies decisions. Simplicity reduces stress. Reduced stress improves coherence. The cycle reinforces itself. Eventually, the practice becomes less about doing and more about noticing when you've drifted. Returning becomes easier. Drift becomes shorter. The baseline stabilizes. At this point, the lost prayer feels less like an act and more like an orientation. You are oriented toward coherence by default. You still experience disruption, but you recover quickly. This recovery speed is one of the clearest indicators of progress. Life will always fluctuate. The difference is how long it takes to return to center. The center stabilizes, creativity increases, ideas flow without strain, solutions emerge organically. This is not because you are smarter, but because fewer resources are tied up in survival signaling. The body, once freed from constant defense, reallocates energy toward growth and repair. This is observable in health markers, mood stability, and resilience. All of this brings us to a quiet but profound realization. The prayer never changed reality from the outside. It changed the conditions under which reality is interpreted and engaged. From those conditions, different outcomes naturally follow. And yet, even here, the process continues. Because if perception can shift and identity can soften, then the final layer to explore is not how to practice the prayer, but how to live from it continuously, which opens an entirely new inquiry into what it means to remain coherent in a world that constantly invites fragmentation, and how that choice reshapes not only personal experience, but the shared field we all participate in as it keeps unfolding beyond what we think we know moment by moment, especially when uncertainty rises, demanding awareness, humility, patience, and a willingness to listen again without rushing toward familiar conclusions.